With franchise tags all given out, everything is finished. We are now looking towards free agency and the NFL draft. So today I wanted to get someone on that could help us take all this apart, take apart some of these contracts, understand what was happening, understand why it happened. So I went ahead and got my guy, Brad Spielberger from PFF. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happened in the last couple of days in this interview. If you guys enjoy, please hit that like, hit that subscribe, and join the family. We are on the road to 5K, and I would love for you guys to join the ride. But without further ado, let's get into it.
You want Philly food?
Yeah, let's do it.
What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, Joe Castro, a.k.a. Philly Fresco, and it is Philly, the podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. We got my guy, Brad Spielberger from PFF. Brad, how's it going, man? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely, man. It's my pleasure. So before we hop into all this, just let them know who you are, where you're from, what you do, where they can find your work.
Yeah, of course. So from Chicago, live in New York now. I'm PFF salary cap and contract analyst. Also contribute to overthecap.com, which is the one-stop shop for anything related to contract, salary cap, all that stuff. And also, of course, like you said, pre-show, talking ball, just breaking down the game as well. You can follow me on Twitter at PFF_Brad. And the big thing I have going on right now is our free agent rankings at PFF. 200 players, all those projected contracts are from me. So it's a big couple weeks ahead for us and for myself.
Definitely. And I know that you were a part of that. So the first question I kind of wanted to ask has to do with the franchise tag we just seen given out to Lamar Jackson. Obviously, Lamar's contract is one that a lot of people expected to kind of reset the market or set the market. And as an Eagles fan, if you don't know, we are Eagles fans over here. We're waiting to see what Jalen Hurts is going to do. How do you think that franchise tag, that non-exclusive tag that they gave Lamar, what does that do for a person like a Jalen Hurts or anybody, in that type of situation looking for a big contract that's kind of comparable to a Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we'll see if an offer sheet does come down. It kind of looks like the NFL is alluding a little bit and kind of pushing back on giving him the full guarantees that he wants. And look, I don't think Hurts is going to push for a fully guaranteed contract. I think, most players understand and having an agent kind of does matter in some ways. And he has a great one in Nicole Lynn at Clutch Sports and recognizing that you can still get a very strong deal with a good structure, good earlier cash flows, but that teams are really going to fight hard against giving that fully guaranteed deal. Not that Lamar shouldn't do it. He has every right to ask for it, but long answer short, I think they're somewhat comparable, in terms of what the money they could get this offseason. Also, you got to, see if Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert come down the pike as well. So I think Hurts is looking for that $50 million plus per year. And I think he ultimately could get it. Not going to happen right away, but I think, by August or so, we could see that come through.
Definitely. And I want to kind of piggyback off that a little bit before I get into the combine. Why is it that we don't see that non-exclusive tag used frequently? I mean, on the surface of it, and I don't do I don't do too much research into it, but on the surface of it, you're given the opportunity to match. You're given the opportunity to collect two first-round picks if someone, does want to take them and you do not match. Why isn't that something that more teams turn to? I feel like that's a good option.
So for non-quarterbacks, it's always the non-exclusive. But for quarterbacks, a lot of the time, 4 of the last 5 has been Dak Prescott got the exclusive, Kirk Cousins got the exclusive. It's really because, and I think Lamar Jackson, in my opinion, certainly applies. What happens if you don't match the offer sheet is you get 2 first-round picks. And Lamar Jackson's worth more than that, right? I mean, if they were truly trying to trade him, you'd imagine they would get, at least 3 first-round picks, probably some day 2 picks as well, maybe veteran players. I mean, you look at the Russell Wilson trade, the Deshaun Watson trade, like he's going to get into that echelon. So that is why generally teams go the exclusive route at quarterback is they don't want to take the risk and take the gamble that someone will sign their guy. Clearly, Baltimore, feels comfortable taking that risk, and we'll see how it plays out.
We definitely will. Now, we both got to enjoy the combine, and I'm sure everybody else enjoyed the combine. This was a crazy one. There was a lot of ups, a lot of downs. There were some, very, very high moments, some very, very low moments for some people. But in your opinion, what, just looking back on it, what was one of the high moments for you or impressive, workouts? And on the flip side, what was one that kind of, shocked you in a bad way? Was there one that kind of you looked at and said, I didn't expect you to maybe run that slow or do that bad in the drills?
I think everyone's talking about Anthony Richardson, and they should. I mean, he had a freakishly good combine. I mean, truly maybe the best, arguably ever for a quarterback. But for me, the most impressive performance was Ade Adebawore, the defensive lineman from Northwestern, who weighed in at 282 pounds and ran a 4.49 40. Then had good explosive numbers with the broad jump and the vertical. Forgetting the exact numbers, but I know he tested well there as well. And it's interesting because he played on the edge at Northwestern, but now I think teams are like, this guy is so strong and has so much explosiveness and get off that we could play him at 3-tech. We could play him, 3-tech, 5-tech. You could play him all over the place. And I just think he went from, again, the combine, like no players jumping their stock by 50 picks, but he maybe went from a top 75 guy to a top 50 guy by just testing that well. On the flip side, I think LSU wide receiver Kayshon Boutte had to help himself. Did not do great the last couple of years from a production standpoint at LSU, and then tested very poorly. And I think that was kind of the only way he was going to salvage his stock a bit. He is, of course, a talented player. Was a super high recruit, had a lot of buzz around him. I think he's a guy that's probably going to fall outside of the top 50 now, maybe not even be taken until the third round or later, because that combine performance, on top of everything else, was just not great.
Yeah. And you bring up Anthony Richardson. I'm glad you did, because looking at this draft, I've been saying it since probably like before the Super Bowl. A lot of the top players are a lot of projection over maybe production, or, people are looking at what they're going to become, instead of what they are right now. How much in this draft do you think teams are weighing projection over, what they are right now? Is that kind of going to be the theme of this draft, grabbing guys that think maybe a year or two down the line they can be very good, but maybe not the best player right now? Is that something that you think teams are going to weigh a little bit heavier this year?
I think they are. I think it's a good point. I think in general that is always the approach, but in a year where I think a lot of teams would tell you, or kind of GMs have suggested during podiums, that it's not viewed as a great draft class, right? A lot of them said, I have like 15 first round grades on players, stuff like that. Which is a little bit low. I remember a couple of years ago they said there was like 10 or 12, but usually you have 18 to 22 or something like that. Anyway, I think you do. You're betting on traits and betting on, hey, we get this guy in our building. Maybe we think he was used incorrectly. I think one example is Lucas Van Ness at Iowa, who didn't play a lot because he was an underclassman, and they don't let guys play ahead of seniors, even though he was better than all those guys. And they had him playing on the inside a lot. I think he's a 4-3 defensive end that should be coming off the edge with his. And he also tested, very well. So I think even more so than normal, we'll see some guys where you say, like his college stats aren't that impressive, but he's a guy that they think they get him in the building, get him in the weight room, and kind of mold him differently. He could then become, like you said, that special player in a couple of years.
Yeah, and you talk about guys used incorrectly, and Lucas Van Ness is a guy that actually I wanted to bring up, and another guy I wanted to bring up was a Tyree Wilson, and I think that they both have had productive college seasons or college years. Don't get me wrong, but they are projections. I feel like if you look at Lucas Van Ness, like you said, he was used incorrectly. You feel like you can put him on a line and you'll get way more production out of him if you're putting him out there, on the front lines for way more than they were out there now. But you also look at Tyree Wilson. I mean, the length, the size, the strength. What do you feel about these guys? How good, or what is their ceiling in your opinion for a guy like Lucas Van Ness and Tyree Wilson?
Yeah, so Tyree, I know he didn't test because he's coming off an injury, but for his wingspan to be 1 inch shorter than Giannis Antetokounmpo is maybe the craziest takeaway of the entire combine, and that's what they're looking for. They want guys with long arms and all these measurables and physical tools and all that, and then you say, all right, you bring him in, he could become a special player. I think he's going to be a guaranteed top 10 pick, maybe even sneaks into the top 5. The quarterback trades could complicate all these things, but he'll get taken very, very early. And I think he could be a really, really good player. To be honest, I need to go watch more Lucas Van Ness tape, but I think Tyree could be a really, really talented guy. Not comping them, but I think kind of has some, Trayvon Walker to his game, just like last year, where, again, just a guy who's, his measurables and his testing was off the charts. But was not super productive in college. Did play on the inside a little bit, and of course Jacksonville brings him in and wants him to kind of be like a stand-up outside linebacker type, almost like Rashawn Gary back in the day as well at Michigan. And then Green Bay brings him in, they chop 20 pounds off him, and he's now a phenomenal outside linebacker edge rusher. So, I think that is kind of the case with him. And then Lucas Van Ness, you could talk to people, they definitely are super high on him. There's not a lot of reps there, right? Because Iowa gives deference to the older players, but The testing was impressive. I think he'll be a top 15 pick at least. And I think could be a guy that maybe in 2024, kind of comes on really strong and makes a big impact.
Definitely. And another guy I wanted to talk about, it's kind of staying on that defensive line, who tested, tested well. Measurables kind of probably hurt him, and that's Kalijah Kancey. Kalijah Kancey having very short arms, and people are very enamored with that, which I understand. Don't get me wrong. But he tested well. I mean, obviously had a crazy 40 time, and he just looks explosive. I understand, the arms length or whatever you want to call it. I understand that he's maybe a little bit undersized for that interior, but are you high on a guy like Kalijah Kancey? Because I do like him. I think that he can be a very, very good, versatile type of player in this league. But what do you see in a Kalijah Kancey? And does that combine numbers scare you at all as far as the measurements go?
He'd be a really good player. And I think it's in today's NFL, especially where there are more and more of these undersized defensive tackles. I know everyone brings up Aaron Donald because he obviously played at Pitt like Kancey does now. Yeah. But, we've seen Javon Hargrave coming off a season with the Philadelphia Eagles is not that big of a guy. You have guys like Grady Jarrett that were a bit shorter as well. Like, there are more and more examples of guys that, they can just get upfield because they have a good get off. And his 40 time and also his 10-yard split in the 40 time, very impressive. You see it on film as well. The short arms are going to scare some teams because they think, all right, then, offensive linemen can get their hands on him, and he can't, shed blocks and use his hands. But he also has, I think, some fairly refined technique. Obviously, he can get better. They all can get better, but he used his hands pretty well at Pitt. He wasn't just a guy that purely relied on his athletic ability. I think you saw some development there, and again, it'd be more, but yeah. I think he'll be a top 15 pick as well. I get the concerns, but I mean, he's a really, really talented player. Graded off the charts for us this past year. And I was watching him before Indy and was like, this guy, I get the size, but if you want the today's version of that interior guy that can get in the backfield very quickly, he's that guy.
Yeah, I will say this. This was my first year being credentialed at the Combine. So I, as a fan, always look at the Combine and I'm like, all right, the underwear Olympics, sometimes it's fun to watch them run, but seeing a lot of this stuff in person, you're like, a man that big should not be able to move that fast. Like, these guys are, I don't know what their families are feeding them, but it is impressive to watch. So I'm glad that you said he's a top 15 guy because I love that kid. And I think he could definitely be something for a team like Philly. Now, I want to ask you though, because last year, I looked at the draft, and I felt like in the top, we'll say 12 to 15, you were getting a very good player, very, very solid player, and there was value there. But there was still value in the depth. There was still value in the later rounds. This year, it feels like to me, maybe the value's more so in the later rounds than it is in the top 10. But how do you feel about that? If you're one of these top 10 teams, and, let's just use Philadelphia for an example, because, obviously just went to the Super Bowl. Are you looking to say, hey, we can get a blue chip player at 10? Or are you saying, I don't mind getting a bunch of players in this draft because they're all so kind of similar once you get to a certain, certain player, certain number?
I think the thing here is I get that sentiment and I agree to an extent, but I also think we're hearing a lot of that because the tackle class is underwhelming and the wide receiver class is underwhelming. So I think you can get a blue chip corner, in the first round. I think there's like 5 guys that could go in the first round that I think are immediate impact day one starters. And that position might be the deepest it's been. I think you get a starter in the 3rd or 4th round at cornerback. So, I wouldn't say cornerback's not a premium position, but I think historically when we think of, first round blue chip talent, we're thinking of tackles and receivers and edge rushers, obviously quarterback as well. So, I think that's the thing is that maybe you take a guy at a position that isn't quite one of those, blue chip positions, so to speak. For Philly, I think if the board falls to them at 10 and they like their options, they'll take someone. But also, as you know very well, how he likes to wheel and deal. I would not be surprised if they say, you know what? There's 5 guys we like. Let's move down to 15 or whatever, and we'll still get a player we like. I think corner makes a lot of sense for them, potentially. Or you take one of these tackles like a Peter Skoronski and you play him at guard, kind of replace Isaac Sumalo. They're never afraid to take more and more offensive linemen. Or a guy like a Kalijah Kancey. You replace Javon Hargrave with a guy like a Kalijah Kancey, who I think fits perfectly, next to a Jordan Davis as that smaller, speedier guy. Let Davis take on 2 blocks and let Kancey kind of run free. So I think they're in a perfect spot. And that trade was amazing for them, obviously. And they can do whatever at 10. And I think they will explore every single option that's available to them.
Definitely. I got two more questions for you, and then I'll let you get out of here, man. But I want to ask you: is there going to be a surprise in your opinion? I know it's still very early in the process, but do you look at this draft and or any prospect and say, hey, this guy might surprise some guys, go way higher than anybody's thinking, or a guy that may go way lower than anybody's thinking?
Yeah, I think there will be. I think 'cause for all the reasons we said, like because it's kind of a weird draft, and maybe there's some teams are low on the general crop of players. You could see a guy where some team, like you said, just says, "Hey, he has good traits, he has good measurables, he's a good athlete." Yeah, it was his college production there, not really, but we'll just go ahead and pull the trigger and see where it goes. I think you hear a name like Keon White, the edge rusher from Georgia Tech, as a guy who's mentioned that mold. Daniel Jeremiah put him like top 15 in his mock draft before Indy. I watched his tape before I went. I said, I don't really see it, but he is, a physical specimen. It's about just figuring out, again, how he can be used as a football player. So, I think he could surprise and go pretty early. As for a guy that could fall, it's a good question. I think some of these receivers, I think we are enamored now with putting all these guys super, super early because the league obviously wants to take them early. But I wouldn't be surprised if, we're sitting there at pick 15 or so, and Addison, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Quentin Johnson, if all of them are still on the board, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, definitely. Cut out. Sorry about that. but no. Last question is going to be kind of more eclipsing everything. I know that you work with the salary caps and you look at that a lot. Why are we seeing so many veteran cuts? What is going on with teams right now? I'm feeling with the raise in the salary cap and everything, teams should have been a little bit more prepared. Why are we seeing so many veterans getting cut? So many cap saving measures.
Yeah, I think still, I know we're a couple years removed now, and this definitely applies to Philadelphia. It applies to everyone. But look, the cap dropping in 2021 as a result of the pandemic is still being felt. And teams had to push all this cap down the road. Again, Philadelphia does that as much as anyone, restructuring contracts, converting salary to bonus and pushing cap hits down the line. Everyone had to do that because they've never experienced the cap going down. It usually goes up every year. So I know it jumped this year, $225 million next year, and 8% is great. But I think it's still that, as they are to a degree kind of getting their budget and their books back in order. Hopefully that is not a thing, starting next season. By that, I mean 2024. I think we'll be kind of through all of that. But that is probably why, is they still are in some ways kind of getting through what they had to do, back in 2021.
Definitely. I appreciate you coming on here and just giving us some gems, dropping some knowledge on us. Brad, it was a lot of fun, man. And one last time, let them know what your Twitter is, where they can find you.
Yeah, of course. First, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So you can follow me on Twitter at PFF_Brad. And all our work's coming out at PFF.com. We have our top 200 free agent list up now with projected contracts for every single guy. And that is my baby of each offseason. So take a look at that. And then if you are interested in the salary cap, contracts, anything like that, overthecap.com is your one-stop shop for everything there. And I'll be helping them out, loading all the contracts and everything like that all throughout the offseason.
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate everybody that tuned in. Be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe. I'm going to leave links to PFF and to Over the Cap in the description, So definitely go show them some love. I'm sure I don't need to leave links. You guys know what that is. But other than that, you guys know what it is, man. It is Fly Goes Fly. And we are out here. Peace.
Eagles fans everywhere, this is for you.
Fly Goes Fly. Touchdown, time to get Jalen this ring. You don't really want to start a thing. This a Bird Gang Nation, baby. It's a Philly thing. Hater, and you looking like you type trash. I'm just here calling on Philly the podcast. And we can call a man dog or watch Miles score off the handoff. Rest of the division, your man soft. Jackson like Sean, hunting like Randall. Season head, early time to do him in. Your boy Philly Fresco. Thanks for tuning in.